Hello, everybody. Welcome to the launch of Unbearable Beings, the latest issue of WSQ Women's Studies Quarterly. My name is Matt Brim, and I'm here to welcome you on behalf of one of the co-sponsors of the event tonight, CLAGS, the Center for LGBTQ Studies here at the CUNY Graduate Center. CLAGS is the first and oldest university-based LGBTQ research center in the country. We're very proud of that. We're very proud to be here at CUNY, the nation's largest urban public university. If you're at home, you can't see this room right now, but we have a very full room at the end of a very full semester. And so I want to congratulate our co-editors, Debarati Biswas and Westengard, for all the work they did on the issue and all the work they did to get people in the room tonight online. And then you can also watch and teach this event on our YouTube channel, and that will be up a couple days after the event. The thing I want to do is not only to introduce you to CLAGS if you don't know about us, and to welcome you back in the future to any of our events. We have a full semester next semester, but I also want to give you a chance to learn a little bit about what we do by supporting us. And we have outside, I think, 3 or 4 of these bags. Where's the camera? These bags. You can order these at home. This is a CLAGS tote. We like to show you the back because it's mesh. Inside the CLAGS tote are 2 volumes of CLAGS Kessler Lectures. The Kessler Lecture is our big premier event that honors somebody. It's kind of a lifetime achievement award in LGBTQ studies that we offer every year, endowed by David R. Kessler. Collected in these 2 volumes are the past 22 years of Kessler Lectures, I think. The latest volume is Queer Then and Now. And I just want to shout out Joseph Donica, Margot Weiss, and Devanaj Dasgupta for editing this volume. You can buy 2 volumes and the CLAGS tote for $75 tonight. If you're online, you can go to info@clags.org to join our membership, or you can go to clags.org online and you'll see how to donate. More than your money, we do love your money. We need your money. We're at a public institution. More than your money, we appreciate your attendance and your interest in the work we do to advance LGBTQ studies. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Debbie. Thanks again, Lauren, Debbie.
We have Shireen and Iniatula and Andy Silva, our great WSQ editors to general editors, to introduce things. Shireen.
I'm actually going to turn it over to Andy first.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much to Debbie and to Laura for organizing this incredible event. I can't see the audience, but I could see, all of the work that's been put into this, and I'm so grateful to be here. And I know a lot of us are grateful that we're able to attend virtually. As Debbie said, I'm Andy Silva, and with Shireen and Ayatollah, we're the general co-editors of WSQ, and we're also faculty members in the Department of English at your college, part of CUNY. So I just want to say a few brief words. Shireen and I began writing our intro for this issue back in June, and our very opening line was noting how everything felt beyond unbearable. And since June, I think it's fair to say that where we are now is sort of beyond. It can feel really bleak to imagine what 2025 and the road ahead look like. But I think what this gathering today shows us is that we must and we will continue to show up for each other. And we can look to the work that's been published in Unbearable Beings as a testimony to the power and the urgency of feminist labor. As we remind ourselves as much as the WSQ readers, when we talk about unbearable beings, we think about bearing, and to bear means not only to withstand a heavy burden, but also to bear witness. And several authors in this issue, including A&P contributor Juana Maria Rodriguez, who's here with us virtually, expressed their struggle to bear the horrors continuing to take place in Palestine, and share their pain and frustration and despair over what lies ahead. But this issue also cultivates hope and resilience. and underscores the power of witnessing, of documenting, and archiving, as well as creating opportunities for transformation, community, and even joy among the unrelenting burdens of late-stage capitalism and settler colonial hegemony. And so today we want to hold space for joy, for labor and for fight, but also for support, care, and time together. So just once again, I want to express our great thanks to Debarati and to Laura for making this issue possible and for making our gathering today possible. And I'll pass the mic on back to Shireen.
Andy. We'd also really like to thank our editorial assistants, Jali Sayers and Maya von Sigisar, who aren't here today, but I think they're they're watching online. They really hold our daily operations together. We also want to thank Rachel Page, Margot Atwell, and everyone at Feminist Press, our incredible interns who come to us from the GC as well as Queens College, especially Hannah, who's over there, and Maya, who's also over there, for publicizing this particular event, and then the amazingly brilliant and talented WSQ editorial and creative board members, our editorial directors, Donna Ian Davis and Kendra Sullivan, and the wonderful staff at the Center for the Study of Women in Society, as well as the Center for the Humanities, with a special shout out to Juwan and Sampson. It's this collaborative effort, truly a feminist labor, that makes the WSQ production possible. And now we'd like to introduce Debbie and Laura. Debarati Biswas is Assistant Professor of African American Studies and coordinator of the Black Visual Cultures minor at New York City College of Technology, CUNY. Her teaching and research interests include contemporary Black and U.S. ethnic literatures, queer theory, radical Black feminism, climate fictions, and decolonial thought. I was told to skip over all of the many publications, but they're linked in the chat. And Laura Westengard is a professor of English at New York City College of Technology, CUNY. She serves on the board of directors at CLAGS, the Center for LGBTQ Studies, and is the coordinator and inaugural faculty member of the new Advanced Certificate in LGBTQ Studies at the CUNY Graduate Center. And all of Laura's amazing publications are also linked in the chat. And thank you so much for this amazing issue and for planning this wonderful launch. And I'll just turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shireen and Andy, and to all of you for showing up tonight. I know this is the end of the semester and it's raining and sort of miserable out there, so we really appreciate you all, which is why we let you start eating before the event. So I've been asked to try to spotlight myself, so give me a second. Is it a pin? Are we saying spotlight? It says I am spotlight.
I think we just need to spotlight the guests when they're
The guests when they're speaking. Okay, I'll try that.
We can see.
What I want to do is share my screen though. What happens if I do that? Is everybody okay?
Yep.
What about ASL? No.
ASL has to be spotlight.
Have you spotlight yourselves or pinned yourselves on that computer?
So
They're good?
they are.
It's just not for us in the room.
Yeah,
Okay.
they are pink. So.
Okay. We begin our introduction of this WSQ special issue on Unbearable Beings with June Jordan's 1978 poem, Poem About My Rights, in which she catalogs the various ways colonial racial capitalism declares the likes of Jordan as wrong. People deemed wrong and therefore unbearable are ultimately marked as disposable. Sylvia Wynter dubs this affective state the unbearable wrongness of beings. The topic of this issue, Unbearable Beings, is inspired by Jordan's disidentification with the fact of being declared wrong. She writes, "I am not wrong. Wrong is not my name. My name is my own, my own, my own." When we started thinking through the concept of unbearable beings, the state of the world seemed unbearable. We didn't realize at the time, as we proposed a panel on the unbearable wrongness of being, abjection, power, and the possibilities of the human in popular culture. That's a very long academic title. We proposed that for the 2020 Modern Language Association Annual Convention. But we didn't know that that would be the last conference we would attend before the world shut down due to the COVID-19 pandemic. That was January 2020. And we didn't really imagine that life could feel more unbearable. We were deep in the, this is so sad I had to add first. We were deep in the first Trump presidency. Watching a ramping up of anti-trans legislation and the dismantling of Black and ethnic studies programs across the country. And yet we now occupy a moment in which we are experiencing and witnessing the increasing unbearableness of being. WSQ is a feminist journal, and feminism has always been about addressing the unbearable. Structural inequalities, interpersonal and state violence, interlocking systems of oppression. But feminism has never just been about consciousness raising around the unbearable. It has always also envisioned new ways of being. These movements wouldn't have been possible without the radical, leftist, often queer, Black and third world feminist and indigenous liberation movements of the 1970s and beyond, such as the Combahee River Collective, who reminds us that, quote, our particular task is the development of integrated analysis and practice based upon the fact that major systems of oppression are interlocking. The synthesis of these oppressions creates the conditions of our lives. We realize that the liberation of all oppressed peoples necessitates the destruction of the political economic system of capitalism and imperialism, as well as patriarchy.
This issue is grounded in radical Black and third world feminism and queer and trans color of critique that helped revolutionize American studies. So in our conclusion, we pay homage to that body of literature and art. Ruth Wilson Gilmore teaches us. Ruth Wilson Gilmore is a professor at the Graduate Center, so special shout out to Ruth Wilson Gilmore, teaches us that, quote, abolition is life in rehearsal because freedom is a place, end quote. In other words, abolition is a dynamic process of rehearsing a future in which all of us are free and all unbearable places are transformed into bearable worlds. On the computer. Sorry, we're trying to get the slides, especially the arrow. Yeah. Can we go back?
Yeah, use the arrows.
Yeah, but there's only one arrow
On the keyboard.
Yeah, I'm sorry, that should have been there. In other words, abolition is a dynamic process of rehearsing a future in which all of us are free and all unbearable places are transformed into bearable worlds. Both place-based movements and movements beyond the local are needed to dismantle colonial racial capitalism and transform carceral geographies into abolition geographies. This process involves rehearsing that which affirms life. Social relations structured by an abundance of care, mutuality, and interdependence, and not organized abandonment, to use Ruth Wilson Gilmore's phrase. Life in rehearsal often begins precisely in the moments when we realize that our allegiance to the oppressive infrastructures of nation states and citizenship, nuclear family and heteronormativity, and pursuit of wealth and property promises the lives of those of us, quote, forged in the crucibles of difference, to borrow Audre Lorde's framing of multiple marginalizations, no futures. The borders around and within our nation states turn our living into crises, declare us wrong and unbearable. a feminist life begins, as Sarah Ahmed describes here, when one chooses refusal over allegiance to the colonial, racial, gendered, capitalist social order. So my comrade, Laura Westengard, and I began our introduction with June Jordan's 1978 poem about being declared wrong by the empire. Jordan, a lifelong Black queer radical feminist, offered us numerous intifada incantations to chant as we struggle to build bearable worlds where all of us are free. We offer you Jordan's poem about finding home with Palestinians in order to learn how to make, quote, weaves of living out of a sense of joint struggle against the empire, to use Neferti Exem Tadiar's meditative refrain in this issue. Jordan weaves a bridge across the Atlantic and reaches out in solidarity as she refuses to stay within the confines of Blackness, defined by the empire in her 1982 poem, aptly titled Moving Towards Home. I was born a Black woman, I'm now become a Palestinian. It is time to make our way home. Let us then wrap our collective meditations, musings, intifada incantations, and other rehearsals for living with Jordan's border abolishing, being affirming love letter to Palestinians. Let us also expand the narrowness of our identity categories by inviting others who have been made wretched differently into our metaphoric rooms where we can make collective living possible. With our hands on our stupid hearts, to borrow Cameron Awkward Rich's words, we who were raised in the institution of dreaming, prepared to risk everything as we trespass and dismantle disciplinary borders in order to bring you vignettes of bearable worlds. And I also wanted to pay a special thank you to, homage to this great painting by Ismail Shamut. So Laura,
this is the dance. We want to go through some really quick but deeply heartfelt thank yous to the Center for the Humanities, including Kendra Sullivan, Juwan Junes, and Samson Starkweather, the Center for the Study of Women in Society, including Mayela Sheehan and Donna Ain Davis, and CLAGS, the Center for LGBTQ Studies, that includes the board, staff, fellows, and executive director, many of whom are here tonight. And I also want to shout out to there's a couple of contributors, or there's a contributor here tonight who's not speaking, that's Megan Berendt, and I want to shout out Megan. And Megan did a book review for this issue of Connor Coco Tomas's book. Connor? Hi, thank you. Yeah. So thanks to everyone.
There is more to thank because it's really takes so many people to make an issue, special issue possible. So WSQ and Feminist Press, Andy, Shireen, Maya, Jar, Rachel Page, Rachel Gilman, editorial board are amazing peer reviewers. And of course, nothing could have been possible without our ASL interpreters, Emily and Chris, thank you so much.
And just to give you a sense of our plan for the rest of the evening, first, we thank all of our contributors who are here and are going to speak about their contributions tonight. We ask them specifically to read from and or reflect on their contribution by addressing the relevance of our issue theme to their piece, ongoing work, or the state of the world.
I think we have to stop sharing.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. All right. So first up is our amazing cover artist, the work of whom graces our cover. Nadia Huggins was born in Trinidad and Tobago and grew up in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, where she's currently based. Her work merges documentary and conceptual practices which explore ecology, belonging, identity, and memory through a contemporary approach focused on representing Caribbean landscapes and the sea. Nadia takes away.
Thank you so much, Debarati. Thank you. It's really an honor to be a part of the issue. It's so interesting that these images were created in 2014 and they just seem to be giving different life every time I see them featured in some way. So it's really an honor to have it be a part of the cover for this journal. I am going to attempt to share my screen, so just bear with me. Okay, can everyone hear me?
Yes, but we don't see it. Yes. Now we see your desktop.
Okay. I don't know, for some strange reason, my iPad won't allow me.
Yes,
It won't allow me to be visible and share my screen at the same time. So I think you'll have to just hear my voice. Okay. All right, so where do I begin? I always want to kind of start at the beginning with this image because people often ask me, like, how did I get interested in the sea? How did I get interested in photography? And of course, I grew up on an island. I live near the beach. And, the ocean is always in your periphery when you live on an island. And of course, being so close to the beach, I always had the experience, of learning to swim and just having sort of like everyday encounters growing up with the ocean. And, I spent a lot of time this sort of seascape or this landscape being really a part of my everyday life. I consider it home, much more of an extension of the physical place in which I live, but just also the place that I interact with on a day-to-day basis. So I really sort of became aware of my surroundings in a very kind of in a very deep-rooted way. And I found myself over the years kind of always returning to it in different ways. So I think, when I started really thinking about making these images, well, I didn't really start thinking about making these images in this particular way, but they sort of ended up becoming a kind of accidental sort of coincidence. I got my first underwater camera in 2014 and sort of instantly started documenting my surroundings. I was looking at a lot of images of the Caribbean at the time, and I'm like, why are there no images of actual Caribbean people from the islands being placed in the image, or things were kind of documented in a very ethnographic way. So it's like you're seeing a lot of marine life, photographed in a very specific way, or it was always like tourists enjoying the ocean, but never people from the Caribbean in this space. So when I started taking these images, I was really just trying to soak up as much as possible, and I was documenting, various types of people swimming, taking self-portraits, and also just looking at my surroundings, the reefs that I had really become familiar with over all of my life. And even before I sort of was really fully aware of what was happening with climate change, or I fully understood the scope of what it meant, I recognized that there was some changes happening in the environment, and I felt a kind of a compulsion to start documenting it. So I started, photographing, thousands of images of just the reef, like different marine organisms, like sea urchins, various types of soft coral, rocks. And, through this kind of like coincidence of merging these two images together, these images started to sort of formulate out of that experience. And I started to really kind of think about this idea of what it means to really transform in a space, and sort of playing with these two images. So if you were to look at one image in the one part of the image without the other, they can still have a kind of a function on their own. It's a kind of a record of a person in an environment, and also a kind of a record of the coral, which has been completely transformed, particularly now in recent times, with the sort of impacts of global warming, but also, we've had several sort of disasters over the years that have really kind of like transformed the space completely. So I look at these images not only as a kind of a ecological archive of a space, but also, thinking about how these two worlds can, almost sort of come into relation with each other, but not fully. I mean, and that the space in between the images kind of represents this idea of, a kind of a buoyant moment where these two kind of separate beings are trying to connect. So the images really kind of play on this idea of buoyancy and the tension between both worlds. And there are 11 images in this series. The majority of them are kind of they sort of play on this idea of a masking, like similar to, we have a practice of carnival here, like masquerading. So it's a kind of a performance of another self. So I've been sort of playing with this idea of this performance through these kind of like environmental kind of mythological creatures in a sense, and using my own body as a part of that. And this is just a sort of an idea of how, how I've sort of shown these images in the past. This is in Santo Domingo, at the museum there. This is in Martinique. And, I've had different configurations of the work, but they generally, this is the only time I've actually shown all 11 images together. Most times I show either 2 or 3 of them. So yeah, and, kind of in response to, like how I sort of see this work in relation to the world. I mean, obviously the ocean is a space that we all share. When the decisions that people make in another part of the world completely affects us in the Caribbean. I mean, we are some of the most vulnerable spaces, especially in the wake of global warming and climate change right now. So I've been really kind of seeing these changes happening over time and trying to document it. So this kind of flash forward, I don't know how much time I have. I don't want to spend too much time speaking if.
Maybe 1 more minute.
Okay, all right, I'll just run through these quickly. So yeah, these images, I had been photographing, these thousands of images of the reef, and in 2021, a hotel investor had decided that they were going to develop this beach and they were going to rip out this reef, which was very much alive and thriving, but they were going kind of based on the fact that nobody really knew what was happening underwater. And I basically like presented these images to the public, the coral images, and like debunked this whole idea that the reef was dead. And really kind of built a sort of a public campaign as a kind of a way to kind of merge my artistic practice, and somehow accidentally found myself doing activism work as a result of it. And, just kind of sharing a lot of these images that I had been kind of slowly documenting over time. And yeah, and then we were able to basically get this plan rejected. Thanks to the help of, thousands of people who signed petitions and wrote in letters to the planning department. And it was just a kind of a wonderful way to see, work which I thought only had a kind of a value in a kind of a artistic aesthetic sense, but then really have, that ability to transform it into something in the realm of activism. So, and yeah, that's the gist of it. I won't go in too much into anything else. So I've been, like now my practice has been kind of an ongoing documentation of these spaces, in hopes that if something else does happen in the future, there will always be evidence to debunk people who contest otherwise.
Thank you. That was so moving and powerful. Our next speaker is also very special for CLAGS, especially for CLAGS. Juana Maria Rodriguez is professor of ethnic studies, gender and women studies, and performance studies at UC Berkeley. Her most recent book is Puta Lies, Seeing Latinas Working Sex, published by Duke University Press. Rodriguez was honored by CLAGS, the Center for LGBTQ Studies' prestigious Kessler Award in recognition of her significant lifelong contributions to the field of LGBTQ studies. Thank you, Juana, for being here. Please take it away.
Thank you so much for having me. When I first received the invitation to contribute to this issue, of course, the war felt so unbearable. But what was really affecting me almost as much was the silence of people, colleagues, other people that were not responding. So I wanted to write something that would sort of jar people into feeling more deeply. And I admit that initially I wasn't sure if the editors wanted this kind of piece or would censor me. I've been censored before. Then when they liked it, and then when I saw the whole issue, I saw that not only does the issue speak to this war and all of these other moments of injustice and violence, but also speaks to sex and kinky sex, and which is another one of my great loves. So I'm going to read from this piece. Yeah, let's see if I get through it. I was touched by the universe once. It was a dark night and a meteor shower was forecast. I went outside to see. Into that night, I reached my hand out to a cluster of stars, humming radiance. To my surprise, the universe reached back. It returned my gaze, my touch, my wish to be one with its infinite beauty. The students who took over Columbia University's campus renamed the occupied building Hind Hall in honor of Hind Rajab. When I consider the unbearable, I think about Hind. I think about the crushing weight of fear and terror that must have been contained in her little body before she died. Surely that weight exceeds any measure of suffering that a soul should have to bear. Just 6, surrounded by the still warm and bleeding bodies of the relatives she has just seen murdered, she is alone in a car, looking through blood-streaked windows, watching and listening to the only world she has ever known be destroyed all around her. In the news report, we see a portrait of Hind's beaming face under a headband of pink flowers, radiating joy. In another photograph, she is dressed like a miniature college graduate, holding the mortarboard to her small head and smiling for a future she did not live to see. It is this face of innocence that I contemplate as I listen to the audio of her tiny voice, the voice of a child who has already witnessed too much. For 3 hours, she pleads with the Red Crescent workers to come save her. I'm so scared, she begs. Please come take me. Please, will you come? I cry with her in Arabic. Habibi, I swear if I could, I would come to get you. The agent assures her and stays on the phone with little Hind while others desperately negotiate safe passage for the medics who are being sent to rescue her. On the recording, we hear how she sees night falling outside the car where she is sheltering, and her cries become more urgent. Hind, like so many 6-year-olds, is afraid of the dark. We're coming for you, they promise. We're coming. At some point, the Red Crescent connects her with her mother, who tries to offer her terrified daughter a mother's words of solace. Even though I know how the story ends, I force myself to listen. A crew of fearless volunteer medics in an ambulance make the arduous journey to answer Hind's pleas for help, but there is no safe passage in Gaza, just as the medics were arriving, signaling on their radios that they were just 1 minute away, 1 minute from reaching her. Their ambulance were attacked by snipers. On the radio, all that is heard is gunfire, and then it goes silent. Their Red Crescent vehicle was discovered 12 days later, just a few feet away from Hind, destroyed by an Israeli missile. That Hind is now one with the ancestors in the eternal shade of an olive tree brings me no peace. We have all seen too much. We cannot unhear Hind's pleas for help, the torturous final hours of her short life, and the brave souls who died trying to save her, become days and months and years of waiting for the world to respond to Palestine's cries, for the world to pay attention. What I know as truth is that none of us can return to a life where Hind's cries go unheard, where the world's pleas for justice go unanswered. Instead of apathy and despair, let me believe in a collective awakening where we turn away from mass media, charismatic leaders, and false pundits and turn to each other instead. Let us practice new ways to love and labor across all the differences we once thought divided us. Let us be courageous in our resolve to honor the fullness of each human spirit. Because while it is all too much for any single one of us to bear, it is only the promise that we might hold this rage and grief together that might begin to offer solace and direction, that in our collective will to create a new world, we find the courage to run into the street, to answer Hind's call, to risk everything to offer safety, shelter, and a future to the children of Palestine. Let us answer her call before night falls. Thank you.
Thank you, Juana. If we had time, this is the moment for silence. Our next speaker is also somebody very special from the Graduate Center. Peter Hitchcock is professor of English at Baruch College and at the CUNY Graduate Center. He's also on the faculty of Women's Studies and Film Studies at the Graduate Center and Film Studies at Baruch. He's Associate Director of the Center for Place, Culture, and Politics. He's the author of 9 books and at least a few more that are forthcoming. He has also authored several articles and special issues. Also, everybody online, watch the chat box because that's where we are dropping all the links to everyone's publications. Peter, please take it away.
Thank you so much. Thank you in particular to Laura and Debarati for getting me involved in this project, and to WSQ, of course. I have to admit that I first contributed to Women's Studies Quarterly over 25 years ago. Of course, I was only 3 at the time. Honest. Of course, the journal and CLAGS have been an inspiration to many of us who've worked at the Graduate Center over the years. My particular piece for this special issue was on, or is on, Samuel Delaney's Times Square Red, Times Square Blue from 1999. If you're familiar with Delaney's books, you'll know that nothing by Delaney is necessarily easy, but it's always inspirational. But I wanted to struggle with this text because of the way it thinks the city of New York in particular, the way it queers the city, the way it tries to think spaces of freedom within the city. And it's set up in a very interesting way as a kind of diptych of essays that one is the second one is like my writing, a little academic. But the first one is primarily based on Delaney's direct experience of Times Square and 8th Avenue in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And what I think Delaney is doing, and what I try to do in addressing this particular work, is connect his personal experiences of space with kind of a claiming of space for living the city otherwise. But in doing that, he finds that the city that he so enjoys, right, the spaces of conviviality in porn movie theaters in Times Square, is being eradicated by a hegemony that we all know in history now, the hegemony of Giuliani, and the 42nd Street development project, right, which basically leveled a good part of Times Square. And so, in reflecting on this, Delaney is thinking about, you know, what remains, but he doesn't want to be nostalgic, right? He doesn't want to get back to those edifices or structures, but what he wants to hold on to is that kernel of conviviality and theorize around it, which is kind of what the second part does. But because I'm interested in dialectics, I actually think about the cut between those two parts of the book and the tension that exists within them that is irresolvable, at least within the form of Delaney's two essays. And that's important for me because that for me represents a horizon of political possibility, a futurity, rather than a representation of what was Times Square before it was Disneyfied, right? Before it became sanitized by a kind of Giuliani politics, which wanted to both segment and ostracize queer politics in New York City at that time. So I don't know how successful this essay is, but I thought that it was an example of how somebody approached unbearability in a creative but also theoretical manner. So to finish, I'm just going to read the final paragraph of the essay. You do not want to suffer the whole essay itself, he said knowledgeably. But just to give you a sense of where I'm going with this and where I think Delaney's imagination of Times Square is going. By the way, 2 footnotes. I love that Times Square, but it was also, I did my graduate studies at the Graduate Center when it was on 42nd Street. And so when I was a young graduate student, we used to joke a little bit about what the professors were doing at lunchtime, because it was 300 yards away, right, what was going on. And in Bryant Park, which is, you know, now a shopping mall, but there was a different kind of trading going on in the 1980s, let me tell you. So that was one connection. The other one, oh yeah, Delaney lived on 82nd in Amsterdam, and while he was living there, I lived on 80th and Amsterdam. So I imagine in my head that we might have bumped into one another in the deli. So the return to Delaney's Times Square points to the agency of desire in living the city, especially New York City. Yet Delaney's wild oscillation between vernacular and academic critique opens up the question of the city to a queer politics of making space that is never New York's alone. Delaney's intervention resonates with concurrent books, concurrent to his essays, theorizing space, like Aaron Betsky's Queer Space from 1997, and Gordon Brent Ingram and co-authors Queers in Space from 1997, which together constitute a dialogic on what modernity hath wrought and speak to the present in the ways in which space can be claimed and lived differently. The formal disjunction of Delaney's text remains, however, these 2 chapters or parts in conversation with one another. Even if theoretically, the instance of anachronism lies elsewhere. I mean, some of his political proposals seem anachronistic. Because so much of the liberation sought is mediated by the right to the city, It is not hard both to find and lose Delaney's book in such a long and disputatious history. There are literally sort of thousands of books that have tried to do this with New York City. Yet since living the city as queering the city is also learning from it, Delaney's provocation is both artful and instructive in all of its contradictions. My colleague Reid Farr makes the important point that Delaney's genius turns on the fact that he is not afraid to both look and see. I continue to marvel at this vision while pondering its optical unconscious, where the real, that's a capital R real, of sexual space is a city imagined and constitutively free. Thank you.
Thank you so much. The cut that Peter describes between the two portions of Times Square Red, Times Square Blue reminds me of the way that Nadia described the separation between the two images, which you can see on the cover of the issue that has been passed around. So we're really interested in those spaces between. Our next speaker is joining us on Zoom. Cassandra Sparks is a PhD candidate in sociocultural anthropology at the University of California, Berkeley. Cassandra's dissertation research examines how professional BDSM sessions, that's bondage, discipline, sadism, and masochism, that's the short version, erotically stage dramas of capitalism and colonialism. She is on the board of CLAGS at CUNY and is a frequent collaborator with Kink Out. Welcome, Cassandra.
Thank you, Laura. And thank you, Laura and Debarati, for all of your hard work bringing this issue to life. I mean, it's been such an incredible collection of essays, art, and poetry, and like so urgently needed for this moment. And I'm really thrilled to be a part of it. So today I'm going to share how my contribution to this issue connects to the theme of unbearability, and then read an edited excerpt from my article. The sexual practice of BDSM entails fetishizing those unbearable dimensions of being, what Anne McClintock refers to as the contradictions of desire which cannot otherwise be resolved. Indeed, McClintock's historical research on BDSM dynamics in Victorian England reveals how the unbearable conditions in which we find ourselves in the wake of colonialism become lodged in our libidinal drives and sexual fantasies, and then how intersubjective and transgressive sex can facilitate encounters with that unbearability. In my own ethnographic observations of commercial BDSM sessions, I found that the setting and context of a scene also gets taken up and played out erotically, as a perversion of the scene's framing conventions. And the setting and context of a commercial BDSM session is particularly perverse. Commercial BDSM sessions unfold within a financial transaction, a context that stirs fantasies of commodification, legacies of colonial dispossession, gender distributions of production and reproduction under capitalism, and histories of the interpenetrations of sex economies, imperialism, and war. Moreover, what transpires between DOMs and clients are interclass, generally intergendered, and often interracial encounters whose forms of difference become the mise-en-scènes for perverse desires, both the clients and the DOMs. More specifically, the sessions I observed in my research regularly staged fantasies of prostitution itself, its transgressions of gendered, racial, and class borders and threats of miscegenation, its immorality, its criminality, its perceived intervention into phallocentric regimes of value, and its refusals of the non-value of sexual labor. The work of the dominatrix, then, is to create containers for clients to stage fantasies of their own unbearability, which find articulation by way of the sexual transaction, the transgressive nature of prostitution, and the gendered, racial, and classed differences between the client and the DOM. As such, DOMs are often enacting fantastical dimensions of their own marginalization, in doing so, engaging in what Debarati and Laura describe in their introduction as, quote, disidentificatory practices that hurl them out of the dialectic of right and wrong, end quote. This is sometimes mundane, sometimes difficult, sometimes arousing, and sometimes transformative. But at every turn, these disidentificatory performances, to use Mistress Lee's phrase, always miss the mark. Queer Asian American dominatrix Mistress Lee used this phrase when describing her sessions in my research, By missing the mark, fantasies never quite represent what we think they should represent or satisfy what it is we hope they will satisfy. In the intersubjective, imminent, contested encounters between DOMs and clients, a gap opens that thwarts both intention and aim. This gap is the focus of my contribution to this special issue. In my article, Missing the Mark, I explore DOM's disidentificatory practices and the possibilities engendered when marks are missed. While I discuss the actual sessions in greater depth in my article, today I want to focus on one DOM's navigations of unbearable pleasure. In their everyday life, and this is a quote from my article, in their everyday life, Mistrix Luz is a trans-mask dyke top who is proud of their butchy aesthetic. They wear their hair in a short brown crop with bangs and dress in stylish, often loose-fitting clothing. While they have historically been anti-femininity in their appearance, when they started working at a strip club, they decided to present in femme drag to make more money. To their surprise, they enjoyed receiving feminizing sexual attention from men. This was all the more surprising because Luz had been struggling with a lack of libido for some time. Yet once they started dancing, quote, I started getting super horny and started falling in love with my body again and understanding my body differently. It was weird how this character was bringing me back to my body and myself, end quote. Through creating an opening for clients' sexual objectifications, Luz was brought into contact with their own desires in new and surprising ways. This disidentificatory character, that was both them and not, facilitated an experience of embodiment that exceeded identitarian frameworks of sexuality and gender. When Luz left the club to become a dominatrix, they developed a new persona, Mistrix Luz. They often describe Mistrix Luz as an emperor. Quote, Luz is kind of dictatorial. I give a lot of orders. I like a lot of protocol. I love when people call me sir. It turns me on immediately. For Luz, the person, this is a departure from their self-perception as someone overly concerned with what others want, and as someone who tends to ask more questions than they give answers. Luz, the person, is also a migrant refugee who recently fled their country of origin after their government issued an attack against them and a family member. They come from a long line of anti-government activists, and their family has suffered decades of attack at the hands of their government. Despite the fact their mother is a second-wave feminist who believes in the abolition of sex work, when Luz came out to their mother as a dominatrix, their mother was more distressed by learning their child was a torturer than by learning that Luz was a sex worker. As such, Mistrix Luz as a persona is an amalgam of not only their clients' projections and fantasies, but also their own drama of state-sanctioned violence. As with their gender, they have not reconciled this dilemma, but instead enacted in their sessions in all its unbearable unresolvability. BDSM sessions are subtended by the ambivalences of gendered, racialized, and classed sexual imaginaries, which, haunted as they are by the enduring violences of colonialism, ensure clients and DOMs' fantasies will miss the mark over and over again. It is perhaps for this reason that the sessions I observed did not appear to provide much relief from the unbearability of everyday life. Instead, they served as sites for staging the impossibilities of life, posing the question of what happens when one stays with the unbearability of being. Thank you.
Oh, that's good. Oh, okay, I'll introduce them. Our next speaker is joining us on Zoom. Jess A. Goldberg is an assistant professor of English and co-director of Gender and Women's Studies at New Mexico Highlands University. Their first book, Abolition Time, Grammars of Law, Poetics of Justice, was just published by the University of Minnesota Press this past month. Exciting. So I'm going to turn it over to Jess. For those in the room, I know this is a kind of a marathon of many speakers and intense topics, so I welcome you to stretch, grab a snack, whatever you need to do to remain comfortable.
Thank you so much. Good evening, y'all. It is an honor to be joining you from northern New Mexico, where those of us working here are thinking a lot about the unbearability, the unbearableness of settler colonialism as it bridges across the Atlantic from North America to Palestine. But it is an honor to be joining you all tonight. It is an honor to be part of this special issue, and I'm so thankful to Debarati and to Laura for the tremendous amount of work that went into this really fantastic special issue. Um, uh, Debarati and Laura originally reached out to ask if I would either write a book review of Marquise Bay's Black Trans Feminism, or do an interview with Marquise about the book. And I don't actually know, I never asked them if they knew that Marquise and I have known each other for nearly a decade now. So I don't know if they knew that when they asked me to do this, but I was like, well, if I'm gonna write about Black trans feminism, I think it would be more fun and maybe more in the spirit of working with someone who I know very well to do a conversation rather than a kind of formal book review. So my contribution is not really my contribution. It's a collective contribution between Marquise Bay and I in this special issue where we kind of use Marquise's recent book, Black Trans Feminism, as an occasion to think about the unbearable. And it was a really rich opportunity to speak with Marquise. We've known each other for a very long time, and it was really a wonderful experience to kind of think rigorously with each other and find those moments where we are very actually different thinkers, and how those moments of being different thinkers produced so in my own opinion about the conversation, some of the most generative moments of it. So what I want to do is I want to read one exchange that we have, and I apologize in advance. Despite being a player of tabletop role-playing games, I'm not good at doing another person's voice, so I'm going to do my best to tag when I'm reading either for myself or Marquise, because I'm not going to change my voice. So I open the conversation by asking Marquise to speak to the idea of the unbearable, immediately flagging that much of Marquise's work is explicitly aimed at rejecting the idea of Blackness or gender nonconformity as abjection, as somehow unbearable. So we open with that, and then the second move of the conversation goes this way. So following Marquise's first answer, I follow up with, thank you for indulging that request to think through the unbearable. I still have some lingering questions on this line of thought, like, what about unbearable life, where the definite emphasis on the life doesn't sever the noun from the adjective, so that we might ask about a Black trans feminism that refuses to refuse the unbearable non/totality of structures. That is, instead of defining life as that which happens in excess of things like pain or trauma or debility, what about a Black trans feminism that stays with those unbearable conditions of being? What, for just one example, about a crip Black trans feminism? I think you've started to get at this, Marquise, in the example in your previous answer. But I want to insist on staying a moment longer with the unbearable itself. How does your thinking against individuation open a way to think about the unbearable without insisting on refusing or escaping unbearableness? And then Marquise answers like this. Okay, so I absolutely hear this push, they say, to think about and not shy away from the life that continues to happen and that is happening even amidst pain and trauma. Life is not what occurs without or outside of hurt and duress. Absolutely. And for this, we have people like Hill Malatino and Cameron Awkward-Rich to thank, among others, of course. So yes, I heed this, indeed feel it. And my response, Marquise says, is perhaps 1.5-fold. I wonder about the distinction between the structures that orchestrate existential, ontological, and epistemological milieus and the feelings they try to engender. In other words, I think perhaps I sometimes am not as precise as needed when talking about these things. The Black trans feminism I try to move through yearns for existence in excess of the ways the structures attempt to dictate how we are to feel, but I am not interested in trying to feel in some kind of excess of, well, what we are feeling. Then Marquise quotes, quote, I want to feel what I feel, what's mine, even if it's not happiness, whatever that means, end quote, Toni Morrison says. And no pun intended, I, Marquise says, feel that deeply. So it's not so much that Black trans feminism's life is trying to get away from, beyond, across bad feelings, as it is getting away from forces that try to demand how we ought to or can feel, perhaps a kind of affective elusiveness. Because we see the structural or the ontological or what have you saying all the time that you not only have to be or do this, but you also have to feel a certain way while being and doing this. Love it or leave it, the saying goes. Part of the ontological criteria is an affective criteria. The thing is, to be sure, I, Marquise says, actually don't think I want to stay with the conditions of the unbearable. That's a small but important distinction to make. The unbearability of trauma or disability or gender nonconformity, for example, is in part generated by conditions that pathologize or refuse to take into account those things. The conditions that make possible a pathologized meaning for trauma or disability are, for me, aims of abolition. That is what I seek to exceed. And so that's the moment in the piece where our title emerges for me as I was trying to think of putting the title on our conversation, abolishing the conditions of the unbearable. And that really emerged out of the difference between Marquise being a more affective and phenomenological thinker and myself being a more structural thinker, and kind of emerging it like, if we don't want to get stuck in unbearability itself, then we have to think about abolishing the conditions of unbearability. So thank you for letting me share a little bit of our conversation. And I'm glad that I got to share some of Marquise's words with y'all today.
So much, Jess. So let me tell you all what's going to happen next. We have our last contributor, Marcy Blackman, who's going to come up to the podium and speak. And then we'll have some time for audience Q&A. And we're going to conclude the program with a musical guest, the Feral Cats. And we'll get a song from them, which is really exciting, inspired by the issue. Marcy Blackman is the author of the novels Poor Man's Child and Tradition. Their third novel, Elephant, is forthcoming.
Can everybody hear me? Great. I just want to thank Shireen and Andy and Debarati and Laura for having me and inviting me to be involved in this issue. It was a bit of a surprise because I'm not an academic, but nonetheless, I think it's a really important issue, and I think in my own work, well, let me just go back and say, I've been an unbearable being since I was born. And part of that for me meant that I didn't fit in the world the way it was created, like a lot of people. And so rather than hide or try to find a place to be within that or try to conform, I decided I needed to create the space in the world for me, and realized in doing so that I was also helping to create space for others who might not be exactly like me, but who were similar or felt similarly. So that's what my fiction does or tries to do, is create the spaces for me in the canon, create spaces for me in the world, and that's where I continue to focus on in my own work. I was asked to write some reflections about Cecilia Gentili, who, for those of you who may not know, was an extraordinary, unbearable being in the world who insisted upon being exactly who she was and who she needed to be in the world, and made the world change and make space for not just her, but the entire community she brought with her. And so I thought that I would just read the reflection of the piece that I gave to Sheen and Andy, and just end it with that, I guess. When Shireen Ayatollah and Andy Silva invited me to eulogize Cecilia Gentili in the editor's note section of the WSQ special issue, Unbearable Beings, I wondered if I was the best person to reflect on such an extraordinary life, cruelly cut short. I knew Cecilia, yes, but many others I felt, and still feel, were much closer to her than I was, and had already written eloquently about her unwavering advocacy, her fierce generosity, and her ability to captivate every room she entered. Then I realized that as her tax preparer, a singular kind of confidant, her co-editor, and a fellow author, I enjoyed a special camaraderie with Cecilia in which we each felt comfortable sharing aspects of ourselves we revealed to few others. And while a bevy of words have been used to define her legacy, among them activist, actress, award-winning author, and mother to an entire trans and non-binary community, the word that reverberates through my heart when I remember Cecilia is revolutionary. When we consider unbearable beings like Cecilia and Angela and Sylvia and Belle and Gloria and Zoldua and Audrey, and so many more that I can name here who reluctantly don the cloak of revolutionary, we think of larger than life forces of nature, which Cecilia was. Rebels and insurgents, Cecilia most certainly was. Freedom fighters, agitators, heroic individuals who frustrate, annoy, and topple the status quo. Immutable flaming thorns in the sides of colonial hegemonic patriarchies. But amid all the fighting, the vulnerability that lives beneath those cloaks often goes unseen. During one of our tax appointments, which were more how's life conversations than financial meetings, Cecilia confessed, I have no idea what I'm doing. When she created the trans health program at Apicha Community Health Center in downtown Manhattan, she said, I didn't know anything about healthcare. She said, I didn't know anything about healthcare. I saw a need in my community and she learned how to fill it. When she signed on as Director of Policy at GMHC, formerly Gay Men's Health Crisis, helping to pass the Gender Expression Non-Discrimination Act, GENDA, she said, I didn't know anything about policy. She saw a need and she learned how to meet it. When she lobbied the New York State Legislature to repeal the infamous walking while trans prostitution law, she saw a need, because that's what unbearable beings do, aka revolutionaries, reared in unbearable conditions in hostile environments in hostile environments. Identify and address needs. They have no choice. Their lives and the lives of the communities that feed and hold them depend on it, even when it means leaping into the unknown. Initially, when I asked Cecilia to join our cohort of editors for Sinister Wisdom and contribute a piece to the groundbreaking special issue Trans Feminisms, what made me think of her, she asked, referring to the monologues she performed for live audiences around the city. She said she had, quote, never written anything down before. What would she have to do? What followed was a long conversation in which we discussed storytelling and what constitutes authorship. That at the time, telling her stories on the stage in lieu of a page in no way diminished her talent as a writer. That most of us, the cohort, had never edited a journal issue before. That we would lean on each other as we figured it out. In the end, Cecilia agreed. As the issue began to take shape, I asked her how she felt about the process. I'm really enjoying it, she said. In fact, she confided, the experience inspired her to write down more of her stories. And when next we spoke, she had just completed the manuscript for the memoir that would become Faltas, Letters to Everyone in My Hometown Who Isn't My Rapist, winner of the 2023 American Library Association Stonewall Book Award for Best Nonfiction. When I think of Cecilia Gentili, I remember a mentor who loved herself and her community without condition, an artist who pushed past her familiar to embrace new forms of expression, an unbearable being who refused to live an unbearable life, and I'm privileged to have known her. I want to add one thing. If I had had 710 words instead of the 700 words that Cecilia and Andy gave me, is that I hope, especially in this time that we're in now, that we all go forth and be the unbearable beings we can be to this current world order that's trying to take shape before us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marcy. There are so many moments in that piece that just really clicked in new ways, hearing it now, even compared to reading it so many times during the manuscript process. And there's so many lessons that we can learn from Cecilia and from the way that you framed her life and work moving forward. So thank you.
Thank you all so much. We have a few minutes for questions. So if anybody has a question, maybe a couple of them. Yeah. But please put your questions in chat so that we can sit with them and think about them even beyond tonight. Yeah.
We'll come to you with Mike. Questions, comments? Yeah. Sorry for those in Zoom. You're not going to see our faces, but you'll hear us.
Thanks, Laura. I have a really short question for Peter Hitchcock about the Delaney piece and the disjuncture between his sort of memoir autobiographical narrative about the sexual encounters cruising in Times Square, and then the other half, which is the reflective theoretical essay. I wonder if how you think about it in light of the much more recent wave of auto theory and auto fiction as attempts to try and merge those two genres into one new genre. So do you think Delaney's two essays are sort of like an early precursor of that, a way to resolve that, or is there a reason why he resisted merging the two?
Amazing, thank you so much. I'm walking the mic over to Peter.
Tough question, having but well enough in time, right? But I do think that the force of Delaney's imagination here is actually to put two things that are seemingly incompatible into conversation. And the reason I think he does that is that there's an internal polemic that arises out of his personal experiences of the Deuce, right, 42nd Street, Times Square, and 8th Avenue, that requires a theorization that the second part of the book attempts to address, but realizes that the politics that attends to that is much more than his experience, right? And so the experience is kind of a base, but I do think he then in putting these two pieces together kind of lives the contradiction. And so when I call the piece Living the City, I'm thinking about another way of doing cognitive mapping, which is to put together in claiming these spaces, both direct experience, the concreteness of the Times Square at that time, with sort of a set of theory or theoretical apparatus that is yet to be. And it's in that dialectic that I think the promise of making space and claiming space still lives with that piece, even all these years later, and even all my years later. But thank you for the question.
Great, thank you. Any other questions in the room or on the chat?
Thank you so much for tonight. I have like a more general question to everyone who would be interested to respond. So I received today an email from the Curie Gender Center. I'm not saying it correctly, but like that the person, like the director, is stepping down and they email about like the freedom of speech within the university in CUNY and Barnard, and I'm wondering here what's happening and what might be, more importantly, we don't know what's happening, but like what are the next steps around like limit of freedom of speech and this the journal seems to not taking no as response so far around like no freedom of speech, but I'm wondering what might be the next steps. Does that make sense?
At Barnard College.
Thank you. Yeah. Let me actually get Coco. No, that's a hard no. Smart. You drew our attention to it. So, but yeah, do you want to answer?
If you want to, you can.
So the question is asking about someone who recently stepped down from Barnard College, and that is not that I don't think anyone from CUNY has stepped down yet, but yeah, it's a chilling reality to face, and it has absolutely crossed our minds again and again when putting this issue together. How long are we going to be able to speak these words and put them in writing and put them out in the world? Yeah.
I mean, yes, fear is a big thing, but, you know, we were trained in these disciplines, like, you know, if you do Black studies, queer studies, trans studies, and you do not speak up against whatever is wrong in this world, then why did they even study? Why did they even come here? So yes, fear is a big thing, and I don't know how we shall navigate it. There's something called academic freedom, and hopefully academic freedom will help us, you know, do the work that we are all doing in our own ways, and we'll be there. But also academic freedom doesn't really, you know, apply to students. So that is something that students should think about. But listen, every time we step into the gap between what is allowed and what is not allowed, that is where we make a difference, and that is unbearable. We live within it, but that is where the rehearsal for living that Ruth Wilson Gilmore teaches us really is made possible. So we have to go there, and it is always very disturbing and very unbearable.
And this question reminds me of Marcy, right? Speaking to the sense that they have always been unbearable, right? And so this fear that is not new for everyone. It's part of kind of an ongoing negotiation with the power structures that we're immersed in. And that's kind of what we're trying to get at with the issue too, right? That we start with June Jordan, like this has been going on, right? Forever. And so we can learn from those ancestors, and we can learn from the people around us who have lived in this space and have, you know, been able to exist within the gap in ways that push against those structures. Anybody in the Zoom that wants to answer or speak? You can unmute yourself, or we're gonna yeah.
I just sort of dropped in the chat that, you know, right now, the Modern Language Association, right, is refusing to even allow a discussion of BDS. In other words, they are censoring the very possibility of discussion, and that, you know, the largest humanist organization has decided to step away from humanity, should really terrify all of us. And so we can only be brave together. Yeah.
We have one more hand in the room, and then we're going to do a quick reset for our musical guest. Just a minute.
Since you asked, Laura, I'll just speak it into the record, since we do happen to be having this event on this particular day, but the person who stepped down is the director of the Barnard Center for the Research on Women, which I think we can see as a partner or sort of a peer institution of CLAGS. And of course, Women's Studies Quarterly, a Women's Studies Institute. So it's Pramila Nadesan who stepped down. And one thing that she specifically draws our attention to in the context of academic freedom is just how immensely their campus has been locked down. And I know this from personal experience. A few weeks ago, I tried to attend a talk at Barnard, and anyone who isn't part of the Columbia Barnard community now has to line up outside and basically have a kind of on-the-fly background check of them done. And you have to present ID and answer questions, even just to access the public lecture. So I was trying to attend a public lecture by an Indian scholar presenting his book, and we were stuck out in the cold for a long time. So academic content, this is just the kind of context and person that I want to speak into the record today.
Thank you so much. After we have our musical guest, we're going to have a chance for those of us in the room here to gather and continue to snack and have wine, and we're going to say goodbye to our Zoom participants. But I want to thank everyone in the Zoom room, in the audience, asking questions. We are paying attention, and we will save the transcript of the chat so that we can all look at those questions that we weren't able to get to.